The frost came early that year, sharp enough to crack stone, and Jorah Fenn had been standing outside the merchant's vault for 3 hours without so much as a coal to warm her fingers. She pulled her worn cloak tighter around her shoulders, feeling the cold seep through the threadbare wool and settle into her bones. Her tusks ached with it, a dull throb that started at the roots and radiated up into her jaw. The leather wrappings on her hands did nothing against the wind that howled down from the mountains and swept through the merchant district like a blade, cutting between the buildings and finding every exposed inch of green skin. Behind her, the iron-banded door of Cornelius Vane's storehouse stood silent and unmoved, as cold as the gold it protected. No fire allowed within 50 feet of the building, the merchant had said. Not a spark, not an ember, not even a lantern with a wick too generous. Gold does not burn, but wood does, and Master Vane trusted nothing and no one, least of all the orc girl he had hired at half the rate of a human guard, because desperation made people cheap. Jorah stamped her feet and tried to remember what warmth felt like. The memory seemed distant now, something from another life. She had been sleeping in the alley behind the storehouse during the day, curled up in a nest of straw she had stolen from a stable, and spending her nights at this post, watching the empty street and the locked door and the nothing that happened hour after hour. Master Vane paid her at the end of each week 3 silver coins that were barely enough for bread and cheese, and he looked at her with eyes that calculated her worth down to the last copper. She was disposable. She knew it. He knew it. The world knew it, because the world had decided long ago that orcs were disposable things, useful for labor and violence and little else. Across the narrow lane, a cottage sat with smoke rising from its chimney, thin and gray against the night sky. Jorah had watched that smoke for 2 nights now, had imagined the fire inside, the heat of it, the way it would feel on her hands and face. A man lived there alone. She had seen him coming and going, tall and lean with dark hair that fell into his eyes and shoulders that looked strong despite the threadbare coat he wore. He was poor, that much was obvious. His cottage was small and listing slightly to one side, the thatch on the roof patchy and thin. But he had a fire, and that made him richer than she was in the ways that mattered on a night like this. She did not expect him to notice her. People rarely did, unless they needed something lifted or someone frightened. But on her 3rd night at the post, as the temperature dropped and her breath came out in clouds thick enough to choke on, the cottage door opened and the man stepped out carrying something wrapped in cloth. He crossed the lane without hesitation, his boots crunching on the frost-hard ground, and stopped in front of her with an expression that was neither curious nor pitying, just matter of fact. "You will freeze to death out here," he said, and his voice was warm, rough-edged but steady. Jorah blinked at him, too cold to be properly surprised. "I am working. Working yourself into a corpse, maybe." He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small iron pot with a handle, coals glowing red inside. The heat coming off it was immediate and shocking, like stepping into summer after months of winter. "Take this." She stared at the pot, then at him. "I cannot have fire near the vault." "Then step away from the vault." He gestured to a spot 5 feet from where she stood, still within sight of the door, but far enough that even Master Vane's paranoid rules could not complain. "Unless you think someone is going to tunnel through the street and rob him while you warm your hands." The logic was sound, but Jorah hesitated. Kindness always had a price. She had learned that the hard way. "What do you want?" The man looked genuinely puzzled. "Want for this? The fire. What do you want from me?" He was silent for a moment, and then something like understanding crossed his face. "Nothing. I want nothing. I just do not like watching people freeze." He set the pot down on the ground at the spot he had indicated, then straightened and met her eyes. "My name is Marcus Roth. I live there." He pointed at the cottage. "If you need more coals during the night, knock on the door." Then he walked back across the lane, disappeared into his cottage and closed the door behind him, leaving Jorah standing in the cold with her mouth slightly open and her thoughts in disarray. She stared at the pot of coals for a long time, waiting for the catch, the trick, the demand that would come. But nothing happened. The street remained empty. The fire glowed warm and steady. And finally, when her fingers had gone numb enough that she could barely feel them anymore, she stepped over to the pot and held her hands above it. And the heat that rose up was the most beautiful thing she had ever felt. That was how it began. The next night, Marcus brought the coals again, and the night after that. He never asked for anything. He never lingered to talk or stare or make her feel like a curiosity. He just delivered the fire, sometimes with a nod, sometimes in silence, and then he went back to his cottage and left her to her watch. Jorah began to expect him, to listen for the sound of his door opening, to feel a strange anticipation as the night deepened and the cold settled in. She told herself it was just the fire she looked forward to, the warmth that kept her fingers functional and her thoughts clear. But that was only partly true. On the seventh night, she worked up the nerve to speak to him as he set down the pot. "Why do you do this?" Marcus glanced up at her, brushing his hands on his coat. "Do what? Bring me fire every night? You do not know me." "Do I need to know you to see you are cold?" The simplicity of it left her without an answer. She watched as he stood and turned to go, and then, because she had to know, she asked, "Are you not afraid of me?" That stopped him. He looked back, one eyebrow raised. "Afraid? I am Orc. I can see that. Most humans are afraid." Marcus considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Most humans are fools," he said finally. "You have not threatened me, you have not hurt me, and you are doing a job that would make anyone miserable. I see no reason to be afraid." He paused, then added, "Besides, if you wanted to rob that vault, you would have done it by now. You are the one with the key, after all." Jorah blinked. She had not expected him to trust her, least of all with that kind of logic. "Master Vayne does not trust me with a key. He comes every morning to unlock the door himself and check the gold. Then he locks it again and I stand outside." Marcus stared at her. "You guard a door you cannot even open." "Yes." "What are you supposed to do if someone tries to break in? Stop them? With what? He does not even give you a fire. Does he give you a weapon?" Jorah shook her head. "I am the weapon." Marcus let out a long breath and something in his face shifted, a flash of anger quickly controlled. "Vayne is a bastard. He pays me. He pays you poorly to freeze and guard his gold, which he does not even trust you enough to give you a key for." Marcus shook his head. "You deserve better." The words landed in Jorah's chest like stones, heavy and strange. No one had ever told her she deserved better. No one had ever suggested that the circumstances of her life were anything other than what she had earned by being what she was. She did not know what to say, so she said nothing, and Marcus seemed to understand. He nodded once, then crossed back to his cottage, and Jorah stood by the fire and felt something unfamiliar and fragile beginning to take root inside her. The nights continued. The cold deepened. The frost became ice, and the ice became snow, and still Jorah stood her watch, and still Marcus brought his fire. They began to talk, small conversations that grew longer as the nights passed. He told her he had been a soldier once, years ago, fighting in the border wars to the south. He had come home to find his parents dead, and the farm sold for debts, and so he had taken the cottage and worked whatever jobs he could find. Carpentry and hauling and labor that paid in coins and bread. He was good with his hands, he said, But work was scarce in the winter and scarcer still for men with no family name and no guild backing. Jorah told him about her own past, though there was less to tell. She had grown up in the orc clans beyond the northern hills, but there had been a sickness one winter that killed half the tribe, including her parents. She had left rather than become a burden on the survivors, and she had drifted south into human lands, taking work where she could find it. Guard jobs were easiest to come by, because humans seemed to think orcs were naturally good at violence, and she had learned not to correct them. The truth was she hated fighting, hated the way it made her feel, but she was strong and she looked intimidating, and that was enough to get her hired. Usually, Vayne hired you because you were cheap, Marcus said bluntly one night, crouched beside the fire pot with his hands spread over the coals. Not because you are good at the job, though I imagine you are. You have not missed a night yet. I cannot afford to miss a night. Jorah kept her eyes on the street, watching the shadows. If I lose this job, I will not find another before spring. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke his voice was softer. Then I will make sure you have fire every night until spring. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the determination in his face, the stubborn set of his jaw. He meant it. This stranger, this poor man who had nothing to spare, meant it. You do not have to do that, I know. It costs you. Coals and wood, they cost money, not much. For you, they do. She had seen the way he lived, the careful rationing, the thin meals. He gave away what he did not have, and she could not understand it. Why do you do this, Marcus? Really? He met her eyes, and in the firelight his face was serious and open without guile. Because someone should. Because you are out here every night, alone and cold, and no one else seems to care. Because when I see something wrong, I cannot just walk past it. He smiled, a small crooked thing. My mother used to say I had a hero's heart and a beggar's purse. She was not wrong. Jorah felt her throat tighten. She wanted to tell him that he was a fool, that his generosity would leave him starving, that she was not worth the cost. But the words would not come, because part of her, the part that had been cold and alone for so long, did not want him to stop. Did not want to lose this strange, fragile thing that had grown between them, this warmth that had nothing to do with fire. So instead she said, "Thank you." And Marcus smiled, the real smile this time, the one that reached his eyes and made him look younger, less worn down by the world. You are welcome, Jorah. Weeks passed. Winter locked down hard and mean, and the merchant district became a frozen wasteland of shuttered windows and empty streets. Master Vayne came every morning to check his vault, his eyes cold and calculating, and he never said a word to Jorah beyond the occasional curt instruction. He never asked if she was warm enough. He never offered her a place inside, even for a moment. He counted his gold and locked the door and left her to stand outside, and Jorah began to hate him with a quiet, burning intensity that surprised her with its strength. But Marcus came every night, and that made it bearable. She learned his routines, the way he moved, the things he cared about. He fed the stray dogs that roamed the alleys. He gave bread to the beggars even when he clearly had none to spare. He helped the old woman who lived 3 doors down carry her water, and he fixed the broken shutter on the tailor's shop for no payment, just because it needed fixing. Jorah watched him, night after night, and she realized that Marcus Roth was the kind of person she had thought did not exist anymore. Someone who gave without counting the cost, who saw need and met it simply because it was the right thing to do. He was poor because he refused to hoard, because he gave everything away, and she did not know whether to admire him or shake him. She began to do small things in return, careful and secret. She left firewood stacked beside his door, taken from the merchant's supply shed in the dead hours before dawn. She caught a hare in the hills and cleaned it and left it hanging from his door handle, wrapped in cloth. She mended the tear in his coat with thread she had bought with her own coins, waiting until he set it down one night, and then working quickly by the light of the coals, her fingers clumsy but determined. When he found it the next evening, he stared at the neat stitches for a long moment, and then he looked at her with an expression she could not read. "Did you do this?" Jorah focused on the street, her face carefully neutral. "You needed it, Jorah. It is nothing. It is not nothing." He crossed the lane and stood in front of her, close enough that she had to look at him. "You did not have to do this. You bring me fire every night. I wanted to do something for you." Marcus shook his head slowly, and there was something in his eyes now, something warm and complicated. "You are something else, you know that?" She did not know what to say to that, so she just shrugged, and Marcus laughed quietly and went back to his cottage, and Jorah stood in the cold and felt her heart do something strange and unfamiliar in her chest. It took her 3 more days to name the feeling. She was falling for him, had maybe already fallen. It was a foolish, impossible thing because she was orc and he was human and the world did not allow for such things. But her heart did not seem to care what the world allowed. It wanted what it wanted, and what it wanted was Marcus Roth, with his warm voice and his steady hands and his ridiculous, beautiful generosity. She did not tell him. How could she? He had shown her kindness, and she would not repay it by burdening him with feelings he could not possibly return. So she kept silent, and she stood her watch, and she let herself have the small joy of his presence each night, the sound of his voice and the warmth of the fire he brought, and she told herself it was enough. But then the night came when everything changed. It started with shouting. Jorah heard it from inside Master Vayne's house, which sat adjacent to the storehouse, a grand 3-story structure with glass windows and a marble step. She had been at her post for 2 hours, and Marcus had already come and gone, leaving the firepot and a quiet word of encouragement. The street was empty, the night clear and bitterly cold, and then suddenly there were voices raised in anger, the crash of something breaking, and the storehouse door flew open to reveal Master Vayne himself, his face red with fury. "You," he pointed at Jorah with a shaking hand. "You have been compromised." Jorah straightened, her hand instinctively moving to her side even though she had no weapon. "What? Do not lie to me. I have seen you night after night conspiring with that man." Vayne gestured wildly toward Marcus's cottage. "Sharing fire, talking in secret. You think I am a fool. You think I do not know a thief's plan when I see one. I am not a thief. You are orc. Your kind are all thieves and savages." Vayne's voice was shrill now, spittle flying. "That man has been watching my storehouse, learning the routines, and you have been helping him. Admit it." "I admit nothing, because there is nothing to admit." Jorah kept her voice level, though anger was building hot and fierce inside her. "Marcus Roth brings me fire because you leave me to freeze. That is all. He has never asked about your gold, never tried to enter the storehouse, never done anything but show me basic kindness." "Kindness." Vayne spat the word like a curse. "No one is kind without reason. He wants my gold and you are too stupid to see it. I am not stupid. You are orc. You are inherently stupid." Vayne took a step closer, his eyes wild. "I should have known better than to hire your kind. You are all the same, treacherous and dull and good for nothing but swinging a club." Something cold and hard settled into Jorah's chest. She had heard words like this before, had endured them because she had no choice, but she was tired now, tired of the cold and the contempt and the endless grind of being treated like something less than human. "If you believe that," she said quietly, "then why did you hire me?" "Because you are cheap," Vayne shouted. "Because I could pay you half what a real guard would cost. But I see now that was a mistake. You are fired. Get out of my sight." Jorah stared at him. "You owe me for this week." "I owe you nothing. You conspired against me. I conspired nothing. I did my job. You owe me 3 silver. Vane's face went from red to purple. You will get nothing from me. Now leave before I call the city watch and have you arrested for attempted robbery. The injustice of it, the sheer petty cruelty, made Jorah's vision blur at the edges. She had stood in the cold for weeks, had done her job without complaint, and this was her reward. No pay, no reference, nothing but accusations and slurs. She wanted to rage, to grab the merchant by his silk collar and shake him until his teeth rattled. But she was Orc, and if she laid a hand on him, the watch would come and she would hang. So instead she turned and walked away, her fists clenched and her heart pounding, and she did not look back. Marcus's door opened before she reached it. He must have heard the shouting because he stepped out with a look of alarm on his face. "Jorah, what happened? I have been fired." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, flat and distant. "Vane thinks we are planning to rob him." "What?" He says I am compromised. He says you have been watching the storehouse and I have been helping you. She stopped in front of Marcus and felt the weight of it all pressing down on her, the exhaustion and the anger and the creeping despair. He says I am too stupid to see I am being used. Marcus's expression went dark, a kind of controlled fury that made him look dangerous despite his worn clothes and thin frame. That miserable bastard. He is not wrong. Jorah heard herself say it, and part of her believed it. I should have known better than to trust this. Kindness always has a price. Jorah, no. Marcus reached out and caught her hand, his fingers warm against her cold skin. I was not using you, I swear it. I brought you fire because you needed it, nothing more. Then why? The question came out raw, almost pleading. Why would you do that? Why would you give up your own warmth, your own resources, for someone like me? Someone like you. Marcus's voice was fierce now, and he stepped closer, his hand still holding hers. You mean someone who stands out in the cold every night doing a thankless job for a man who treats her like dirt. Someone who is strong and patient and decent despite the fact that the world has given her every reason not to be. He shook his head. I did it because you deserved better, Jorah. Because everyone deserves basic kindness, and if no one else was going to give it to you, then I would. Jorah felt something break open inside her, something that had been locked down and frozen for longer than she could remember. I do not understand you. You do not have to understand me, you just have to believe me. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. I care about you, Jorah. I have for a while now. Not because I want something from you, but because you are worth caring about. She stared at him, at the honesty in his face, and she realized that he meant it. Every word. This ridiculous, generous, impossible man actually cared about her. I care about you too, she said, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. More than I should. Marcus smiled, that crooked, warm smile that made her chest ache. There is no such thing as caring too much. They stood there in the frozen street, hands clasped, and for a moment everything else fell away. The cold, the injustice, the impossible gulf between their worlds, none of it mattered. There was just this, the warmth of his hand in hers, the steady certainty in his eyes. Jorah wanted to kiss him, wanted it so badly her whole body ached with it, but she did not know if he wanted the same, did not know if she was allowed to want such things. Then Marcus said, "Can I kiss you?" And Jorah, who had spent her whole life being told what she could not have, said, "Yes." He kissed her there in the street, gentle and sure, and it was nothing like she had imagined and everything she had hoped for. His lips were warm, and he tasted like wood smoke and something sweet, and when he pulled back his eyes were bright and his smile was real. I have wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted. You should have done it sooner. Marcus laughed, a sound of pure delight, and then he kissed her again, and this time Jorah let herself melt into it, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be real. They went inside his cottage, and it was small and drafty and filled with second-hand furniture. But the fire in the hearth was warm and the bed in the corner was piled with blankets, and it felt like the safest place Jorah had ever been. Marcus made tea from herbs he grew in pots on the windowsill, and they sat by the fire and talked until dawn, about everything and nothing, about their pasts and their hopes, and the uncertain future that stretched ahead. Jorah told him things she had never told anyone, about the loneliness of being orc in human lands, about the way she had learned to make herself small and quiet and unobtrusive. Marcus listened without interrupting, his hand resting on hers, and when she finished he said, "You should never have to make yourself small. You are allowed to take up space in the world. The world does not agree. Then the world is wrong." She smiled at that, at his unshakable belief in simple justice, and she leaned her head against his shoulder and felt something in her chest loosen and ease. "What do we do now?" she asked. "I have no job, no money. I cannot stay in the alley behind the storehouse anymore." "You stay here," Marcus said immediately, "with me, for as long as you need. I cannot ask that of you. You are not asking, I am offering." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I know I do not have much, Jorah. This cottage is falling apart and I can barely keep myself fed most months, but what I have is yours. I mean that." Jorah felt her eyes sting and she blinked hard against the tears. "You are the best person I have ever met. I am just a man who knows a good thing when he sees it." Marcus kissed her forehead, gentle and brief. "We will figure the rest out together." And they did. Jorah moved into the cottage that day, bringing with her the few possessions she owned, a spare set of clothes and a knife and a blanket worn thin with age. Marcus cleared space for her, gave her half the pegs by the door for her cloak, half the shelf for her things. It was not much, but it felt like everything. That night, they slept in the same bed for the first time, curled together under a pile of blankets, and Jorah thought that she had never been so warm in her life. The days that followed were hard in the practical ways that poverty always made things hard. Marcus took whatever work he could find, splitting wood for the baker, repairing fences for the blacksmith, hauling stones for the mason. Jorah went with him when she could, offering her strength for the heavy lifting, and together they earned just enough to buy bread and turnips and cheap cuts of meat. It was not the life either of them had dreamed of, but it was honest work, and they did it side by side, and at the end of each day they came home to the cottage and the fire and each other. Jorah learned to cook on the small iron stove, experimenting with the cheap ingredients they could afford, and Marcus taught her to read in the evenings, using an old book of poems he had kept from his childhood. She was a quick study, her mind sharp despite what Vayne had said, and within a month she could make her way through simple passages without help. Marcus was proud of her. She could see it in his face, and that pride warmed her more than any fire. They were happy. Against all odds, in the face of poverty and prejudice, and a world that did not want them to be together, they were happy. But the world has a way of intruding on happiness, and 2 months after Jorah was fired, the intrusion came in the form of a pounding on the cottage door in the middle of the night. Marcus woke first, groggy and confused, and Jorah was right behind him, her instincts sharp from years of guarding. "Who is it?" Marcus called, pulling on his trousers. "City watch." "Open the door." They exchanged a look, fear and confusion passing between them in the darkness. Marcus opened the door to find 3 watchmen standing outside, their lanterns casting harsh shadows. The leader, a thick-necked man with a scar across his cheek, looked Marcus up and down with open contempt. "Marcus Roth, yes. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit robbery." The words hung in the cold air, impossible and absurd. "What?" Cornelius Vayne's storehouse was robbed tonight. He says you and the orc were planning it." The watchman gestured, and the other two moved forward to grab Marcus's arms. "You will come with us." "Wait." Jorah stepped forward, her heart hammering. "He has nothing to do with this. He was here all night with me," the watchman sneered. "The word of an orc means nothing, and you are under arrest as well." He nodded to his men. "Take them both." They were hauled out into the night, no time to dress properly, no chance to gather their belongings. Jorah struggled, and one of the watchmen struck her across the face with the back of his hand, hard enough to split her lip. Marcus shouted in protest, and they hit him too, a blow to the stomach that doubled him over. After that they both went quietly, because resistance would only make it worse. The watch house was a squat stone building near the center of town, and they were thrown into separate cells. Iron bars and cold stone, and the smell of unwashed bodies. Jorah pressed her face to the bars and tried to see Marcus in the cell across the corridor, but the angle was wrong and the light too dim. "Marcus," she called, "are you hurt?" "I am fine." His voice came back, strained but steady. "Are you?" "Yes." Her lip throbbed where it had split, but she ignored it. "This is madness. We did not rob Vayne." "I know, but he has accused us, and the Watch will believe him over us." Jorah's hands tightened on the bars until her knuckles went pale green. "This is because of the fire, because you were kind to me." "Jorah, no. It is. If you had never brought me those coals, if you had just ignored me like everyone else, you would not be here. And you would have frozen." Marcus's voice was fierce now, echoing in the stone corridor. "Listen to me, Jorah. I do not regret what I did, not for a second. Whatever happens, I do not regret it." She wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the unfairness of it all, but before she could speak there were footsteps on the stairs and the lead watchman appeared, his lantern swinging. "The magistrate will see you in the morning," he said flatly. "Until then you stay here, and if you are smart you will confess. It will go easier for you." "We have nothing to confess," Marcus said. The watchman shrugged. "Your funeral." He turned and walked away, and the darkness closed in again. The night passed with agonizing slowness. Jorah could not sleep, could not do anything but sit on the cold stone bench in her cell and listen to Marcus breathing across the corridor and think about all the ways this could end badly. They could hang for this. Robbery of a wealthy merchant's storehouse was a serious crime, and the word of an orc and a poor man would count for nothing against the word of Cornelius Vayne. She had seen it before, the way justice bent and twisted to favor the rich and powerful. They were doomed, and it was her fault, because Marcus would never have been accused if not for his association with her. But when dawn came and they were hauled before the magistrate, a thin old man with silver hair and sharp eyes, something unexpected happened. The magistrate listened to Vayne's accusations, nodding along as the merchant described how he had seen Jorah and Marcus conspiring, how they had clearly been planning to rob the storehouse, how the theft last night was the inevitable result of their scheming. Then the magistrate turned to Marcus and said, "What do you have to say to these charges?" "I say they are lies." Marcus stood straight despite the bruises on his face, his voice clear. "I never conspired with anyone to rob Master Vayne. I brought Jorah fire while she was working for him, because she was freezing and he would not allow her even basic comfort. That is all. I have never been inside his storehouse. I do not know what is kept there beyond gold, and I had nothing to do with the theft." "And you?" The magistrate looked at Jorah. "What do you say?" "I say the same. I guarded Master Vayne's storehouse for weeks and never once betrayed his trust. When he fired me, I left. I have not been back since. I know nothing about this robbery." The magistrate steepled his fingers, his expression thoughtful. "Master Vayne, you say the theft occurred last night?" "Yes, Your Honor, sometime between midnight and dawn, My gold is gone, nearly 1,000 crowns worth. And when did you discover this theft? This morning, when I went to open the storehouse. I see. The magistrate leaned back in his chair. And you immediately concluded that these two were responsible, despite the fact that the orc has not worked for you in 2 months and the man has never worked for you at all. Vane hesitated, his confidence faltering. They were conspiring, Your Honor. I saw it. You saw a man bringing fire to a woman who was standing watch in freezing temperatures. That is not evidence of conspiracy, Master Vane. That is evidence of basic human decency. The magistrate's voice was dry, almost amused. Do you have any actual proof that these two were involved in the robbery? Witnesses, perhaps, evidence placing them at the scene? No, but then I am afraid I cannot hold them. The magistrate banged his gavel. Marcus Roth and Jorah Fenn, you are free to go. Master Vane, I suggest you look elsewhere for your thieves, perhaps among people who actually had access to your storehouse. Vane's face went red, then white. Your Honor, you cannot. I can and I have. This hearing is concluded. The magistrate stood and swept out of the room, leaving Vane sputtering in his wake. Jorah and Marcus were released immediately, ushered out into the cold morning air with curt nods from the watchmen. They stood on the steps of the watchhouse, blinking in the pale sunlight, hardly daring to believe they were free. That was. Jorah began and then stopped because she had no words for what that was. Unexpected, Marcus finished. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. But I will take it. They walked back to the cottage in silence, too drained to talk, and when they got there Marcus barred the door and they collapsed into bed together, holding each other tight. Jorah buried her face in his chest and let herself shake, all the fear and anger and relief coming out in great shuddering waves. Marcus held her through it, his hand stroking her hair, his voice murmuring soft reassurances. We are safe, he said. We are safe, Jorah, it is over. But it was not over. 2 days later, word spread through the town that Vane's own servants had been arrested for the robbery. It turned out that the merchant had been mistreating his household staff for years, paying them barely anything and punishing them harshly for the smallest infractions. 3 of them had finally decided they had had enough, and they had stolen the key to the storehouse from Vane's own pocket while he slept, loaded the gold onto a cart, and attempted to flee the city. They had been caught at the north gate by a sharp-eyed guard who noticed the weight of their cart and demanded to inspect it. The news traveled fast, and by the end of the week, everyone knew that Cornelius Vane had accused innocent people while his own household had been robbing him blind. The magistrate summoned Vane and fined him heavily for false accusation and wasting the court's time. The merchant paid, but his reputation was in ruins, and people whispered that he was getting what he deserved. Marcus and Jorah heard all of this from the baker, who told the story with relish while Marcus bought bread. Serves him right, the baker said, wrapping the loaf in cloth. Always thought he was better than everyone else, that one. Maybe this will teach him to treat people decently. Maybe, Marcus said, though he did not sound convinced. They walked home through the market, and Jorah noticed the way people looked at them now, not with suspicion but with something like respect. The story had spread, the one about the poor man who had shared his fire with the orc guard, and then been falsely accused by the rich merchant he had never wronged. People like stories like that, stories where the powerful were brought low and the decent were vindicated. It made Jorah uncomfortable, being the subject of such a story, but she could not deny it felt good to walk through the market without people crossing the street to avoid her. A week after the trial, a messenger arrived at the cottage with a summons. Jorah and Marcus were requested to appear at the magistrate's office at their earliest convenience. They went that afternoon, nervous and uncertain, and found the magistrate waiting for them with a small wooden box on his desk. "Ah, there you are." The magistrate gestured for them to sit. "I will not keep you long. I wanted to inform you that the stolen gold has been recovered in full, and Master Vane is offering a reward for its return. Normally, such a reward would go to the city watch, but in this case, I have convinced him that it should go to you." Jorah blinked. "To us? Why?" "Because you were wrongly accused, and because your testimony helped establish Vane's negligence in securing his own household. Consider it compensation for your trouble." The magistrate pushed the box across the desk. 50 crowns. It is not a fortune, but it should help." Marcus opened the box, and Jorah saw the glint of gold coins inside, more money than she had ever seen in one place. "This is, thank you, Your Honor. Do not thank me, thank your own integrity." The magistrate smiled, a thin, sharp expression. "And perhaps consider this a lesson in the value of treating people decently. Vane might have avoided all of this if he had simply allowed his guard a fire." They left the office in a daze, the box clutched tightly in Marcus's hands. 50 crowns. It was enough to repair the cottage, to buy supplies for the winter, to live comfortably for months. It was not wealth, not by Vane's standards, but for them it was everything. "What should we do with it?" Jorah asked as they walked home. Marcus looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "What do you want to do?" she considered. For so long she had lived day to day, never daring to think about the future. But now, with Marcus beside her and money in their hands, the future seemed like something she could actually plan for. "I want a home," she said slowly. "A real one. Not just a place to sleep, but somewhere we can build a life." "Then that is what we will do." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Jorah, I know we have not talked about this yet, but I need you to know. I want to build that life with you, not just for now, but for always. I love you." The words hit her like a physical force, knocking the breath from her lungs. "You love me." "I do. I have for a while now. I know I am not much of a catch, and I know the world will make things hard for us, but I do not care. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I do not want to lose you." Jorah felt tears prick at her eyes, and she did not bother to hide them. "I love you too, Marcus. So much it scares me sometimes." He smiled, that beautiful crooked smile, and pulled her into his arms. They stood there in the middle of the street, holding each other, and Jorah thought that this right here was what she had been missing her whole life. Not gold, not comfort, but this. Love. Belonging. Home. They used the money carefully. Marcus hired a carpenter to fix the roof and patch the walls, and Jorah bought proper furniture, a sturdy table and chairs, a new mattress for the bed. They stocked the larder with food that would last through the winter, flour and salt and dried meat, and they bought seeds for a garden in the spring. It felt like nesting, like building something permanent, and every addition to the cottage made it feel more like theirs. Winter loosened its grip as the weeks passed, and the first thaw came in late Marching, turning the snow to slush and the ice to mud. Jorah and Marcus planted the garden together, working side by side in the cold soil, and Marcus taught her the names of the seeds and how deep to plant them. She learned quickly, her hands strong and sure, and when they finished they stood back and looked at the neat rows with satisfaction. "It will be good to grow our own food," Marcus said, brushing the dirt off his hands. "Save us money, and it tastes better anyway." Jorah nodded, but she was not really thinking about the garden. She was thinking about the cottage, about the life they were building, about the way Marcus had said he wanted this for always. She wanted that too, wanted it with a fierce certainty that left no room for doubt. But she did not know how to ask for it, did not know if orcs and humans could even marry in this kingdom. The thought made her chest tight with uncertainty. That night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, she worked up the courage to ask, Marcus, can I ask you something? Anything. When you said you wanted to build a life with me, did you mean? She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. Marcus looked at her, his expression softening with understanding. Did I mean marriage? Yes. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. I did. I know it might not be easy, and I do not even know if it is legal for a human and an orc to marry in this kingdom. But if it is possible, then yes, Jorah, I want to marry you. She felt her breath catch. I want that too. Then we will figure it out. Marcus leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and sure. Together. The next day, Marcus went to the city clerk and asked about the laws regarding interspecies marriage. The clerk, a bored-looking man with ink-stained fingers, shuffled through a stack of legal texts and finally looked up with a shrug. It is not explicitly forbidden, he said. The law does not mention orcs at all, actually, so technically, there is nothing stopping you. Technically, Marcus repeated, meaning it is legal, but people will not like it. You will catch grief for it, no question. But if you want to do it, I can process the paperwork. The clerk pulled out a form and dipped his pen in ink. Names. They were married a week later in a quiet ceremony at the magistrate's office, with the baker and his wife as witnesses. Jorah wore a simple dress she had bought with her own money. Dark blue wool that fit her well, and Marcus wore his best coat, patched but clean. The magistrate performed the ceremony with brisk efficiency, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed Jorah in front of everyone and did not care who saw. The baker's wife cried and hugged them both, and the baker clapped Marcus on the shoulder and said, "You are a braver man than most, Roth. I hope you will be happy together." "We will be," Marcus said, and he looked at Jorah with such certainty that she believed him. They walked home through the city as husband and wife, and Jorah felt like she was floating. She had never imagined this, never dared to hope that she could have something so normal, so human, as a wedding and a husband and a home. But here it was, real and solid and hers. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. Marcus continued to take work where he could find it, and Jorah joined him, her strength and endurance making her valuable on the harder jobs. They saved what they could and spent carefully, and slowly, steadily, their situation improved. The garden flourished, providing vegetables through the summer, and Marcus taught Jorah to preserve them for the winter, pickling and drying and storing away. They were not wealthy, not by any stretch, but they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. The town grew accustomed to them over time. There were still people who stared, people who muttered unkind things when they passed, but there were also people who nodded in greeting, who bought Marcus's labor and did not flinch when Jorah came to help. The baker always saved them the best loaves, and the blacksmith let Marcus use his forge for small projects. It was not acceptance, not quite, but it was tolerance, and that was more than Jorah had expected. One evening in late summer, as they sat outside the cottage watching the sun set, Marcus said, "I have been thinking." Jorah looked over at him, her hand resting on his knee. "About what?" "About the future. About what we want to do with the rest of our lives." He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. "I do not want to spend the rest of my life taking odd jobs and scraping by. I want to build something, something that is ours." "What did you have in mind? A workshop?" Marcus turned to look at her, his expression earnest. "I am good with my hands, and you are strong and smart. We could make furniture, sell it at the market, maybe even take commissions. It would be hard work, but it would be ours. We could build a real business." Jorah considered this, turning the idea over in her mind. It was ambitious, maybe even foolish, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. Marcus was skilled and she could learn. They could do this together. "I think it is a good idea," she said finally. "Let us do it." They spent the rest of the summer planning. Marcus drew up designs for chairs and tables, cabinets and benches, and Jorah helped him gather the wood and tools they would need. They used the last of the reward money to buy a proper set of carpenter's tools and a supply of seasoned lumber, and they turned the small shed behind the cottage into a workshop. It was cramped and drafty, but it was theirs, and that was what mattered. Marcus taught Jorah the basics of carpentry, how to measure and cut, how to join pieces together so they held strong. She was clumsy at first, her hands too used to rough work, but she learned quickly, her focus and determination carrying her through the frustration. By autumn, she could cut a straight line and sand a surface smooth, and Marcus looked at her work with pride. They made their first piece together, a simple chair with a straight back and sturdy legs. It was not perfect, the joints were a little loose and the finish was uneven, but it was solid and functional, and when Marcus sat in it and grinned up at her, Jorah felt a surge of accomplishment that rivaled anything she had felt in her life. "We did it," Marcus said. "We did. And we will do it again, and again, until we have enough to sell." They worked through the autumn, building chairs and tables and small cabinets, filling the workshop with the smell of sawdust and varnish. When they had enough pieces, they loaded them onto a borrowed cart and took them to the market, setting up a stall in the corner where the craftsmen sold their wares. Jorah stood behind the table, her arms crossed, while Marcus talked to potential customers, explaining the quality of the work and the fairness of the prices. They sold 3 chairs that first day and a small table the next. It was not a fortune, but it was a start, and every sale felt like a victory. Word spread slowly, the way it always did in small towns, and people began to seek them out, asking for custom pieces or specific designs. Marcus took the commissions carefully, never promising more than they could deliver, and Jorah worked beside him, learning and growing more skilled with each project. By the time winter came again, they had a reputation. People knew Marcus Roth and his orc wife, the carpenter and his assistant who made solid, beautiful furniture at fair prices. There were still those who refused to buy from them, who turned away when they saw Jorah, but there were enough customers who did not care, or who cared more about the quality of the work, and that was enough. The second winter in the cottage was nothing like the first. They had money saved, food stored, and a fire that burned warm and steady every night. Jorah no longer remembered what it felt like to stand outside in the cold, guarding gold that was not hers for a man who did not care if she froze. That life felt distant now, like something that had happened to a different person. She had a home, a husband, a future. She had warmth not just from the fire, but from the life they had built together. One night, as they lay in bed with the blankets pulled up against the cold, Marcus said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not brought you that fire?" Jorah turned to look at him, his face half shadowed in the dim light from the banked embers. "All the time. And I think I would have frozen or quit or done something desperate." She reached out and traced the line of his jaw with her finger. "You saved me, Marcus, in every way that matters." "We saved each other," Marcus said quietly. "I was so lonely before you. I gave everything away because I had nothing I wanted to keep. But now—" He pulled her closer, his arms warm and strong around her. "Now I have everything I want, and I am not letting go." Jorah kissed him, slow and deep, and let herself sink into the warmth of him, the solid reality of his presence. "Neither am I." Spring came, as it always did, bringing green shoots in the garden and longer days and the promise of new beginnings. Jorah woke one morning feeling strange, a queasy, unsettled sensation in her stomach that she could not explain. She ignored it at first, thinking it was something she had eaten, but when it persisted for a week and then 2, she began to suspect something else. She went to the midwife, an old woman who lived on the edge of town and who had a reputation for being discreet. The midwife examined her, asked a series of questions, and then sat back with a knowing smile. "You are with child, my dear. About 2 months along, I would say." Jorah stared at her, the words not quite making sense. "I am." "What? Pregnant? You are going to have a baby?" The world tilted sideways. Jorah sat down heavily on the midwife's stool, her mind racing. A baby. She and Marcus were going to have a baby. She had not planned for this, had not even considered it, and now it was happening and she did not know what to feel. Fear, certainly. Excitement, maybe. But mostly a kind of overwhelming awe at the idea that there was a life growing inside her, a piece of her and Marcus combined. "Are you all right, dear?" the midwife asked gently. "I think so." Jorah looked up, and she could not help the smile that spread across her face. "I think I am very all right." She told Marcus that night, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He stared at her for a long moment, his eyes wide, and then he let out a whoop of joy and swept her up into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby. We are. I am going to be a father. You are." Marcus set her down carefully as if she were made of glass, and then he dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her stomach, listening. "I cannot hear anything yet. You will not be able to for months. I do not care. I am listening anyway." He looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I am going to be the best father I can be, Jorah. I swear it. I know you will." She ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "We are going to be all right, Marcus, all 3 of us." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Jorah continued to work in the workshop through the summer, her strength undiminished, and Marcus hovered over her like a mother hen, constantly asking if she needed to rest or eat or sit down. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, because she knew it came from love, and because secretly she found it endearing. They prepared for the baby as best they could, setting aside money and supplies, building a cradle out of smooth oak and soft wool blankets. Marcus carved toys, small animals and birds, and lined them up on the shelf in the bedroom. Jorah sewed tiny clothes, her stitches careful and even, and she marveled at how small they were, how fragile and perfect. The town watched their preparations with interest, and opinions were divided. Some people thought it was sweet, the way Marcus and Jorah were so clearly excited about the coming child. Others muttered that it was unnatural, a half-orc baby, and who knew what it would look like or how it would turn out. Jorah heard the whispers and they stung, but she held her head high and refused to let them dim her joy. This was her child, hers and Marcus's, and it would be loved no matter what. The baby came in late autumn, just as the leaves were turning and the air was growing cold again. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Jorah thought she might not survive it. But the midwife was skilled and Marcus was there, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. And finally, after hours of pain, there was a cry, high and thin and impossibly loud. "It is a girl," the midwife said, wrapping the baby in a blanket and handing her to Jorah. "A healthy, beautiful girl." Jorah looked down at her daughter and felt her heart stop. The baby was small and wrinkled, her skin a pale greenish tone halfway between Jorah's deep green and Marcus's tan. She had tiny pointed ears and a button nose, and when she opened her eyes they were dark and bright and full of curiosity. She was perfect. Absolutely, undeniably perfect. Marcus leaned over Jorah's shoulder, his breath catching. "She is beautiful. She is ours. What should we call her?" Jorah thought for a moment, and then she smiled. "Zara. Her name is Zara." "Zara," Marcus repeated, testing the name. "Zara Roth, I love it." They spent the next weeks in a haze of exhaustion and joy, learning how to care for their daughter, how to feed her and change her and soothe her when she cried. Zara was a good baby, calm and curious, and she looked at the world with wide eyes that seemed to take in everything. Jorah fell in love with her all over again every day, with the soft weight of her in her arms and the tiny sounds she made, and the way she gripped Jorah's finger with surprising strength. Marcus was a devoted father, just as he had promised. He sang to Zara, old soldiers' songs and lullabies his mother had taught him, and he carried her around the cottage, pointing out the fire and the windows and the furniture they had built. Jorah watched them together and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was her family. This was her home. After a lifetime of cold and loneliness, she had found warmth and love, and she had found it in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected person. The years passed and Zara grew. She was a bright, lively child, quick to laugh and quick to learn. She had her mother's strength and her father's curiosity, and she moved through the world with a confidence that Jorah envied. The town accepted her more easily than they had accepted Jorah, perhaps because she had been born there, or perhaps because she was a child and children were harder to hate. She played with the other children, human and orc and the few half-bloods like herself, and she came home every evening with stories and scraped knees and a smile that lit up the cottage. When Zara was 3, Jorah found herself pregnant again, and this time she was prepared. The second baby came easier than the first, a boy they named Ian, with his father's dark hair and his mother's pointed ears. He was a quiet baby, serious and watchful, and he adored his sister, following her everywhere with wide eyes. Marcus and Jorah expanded the cottage, adding a second room for the children, and they expanded the workshop too, hiring an apprentice to help with the increased demand for their furniture. The business was thriving, and they were no longer poor, though they were not rich either. They had enough, and that was all they needed. One evening, when Zara was 5 and Ian was 2, the family sat together by the fire after dinner. Zara was playing with the carved animals her father had made, and Ian was curled in Jorah's lap, half asleep. Marcus sat in the chair they had built together all those years ago, the first one, still sturdy despite the years of use. He looked around the room at his wife and his children and the life they had built, and he smiled. "What are you thinking about?" Jorah asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am." Marcus reached over and took her hand. "I am thinking about that first night when I brought you the coals. I had no idea then that it would lead to this. Neither did I. If I could go back and tell that version of myself what was coming, I do not think he would believe me." Marcus squeezed her hand. "You and Zara and Ian and this home, this life, it is more than I ever hoped for." Jorah leaned her head back against the chair and looked at the ceiling, at the sturdy beams Marcus had repaired and the plaster she had helped to smooth. "Do you ever think about that night, about what would have happened if you had not brought me the fire?" "Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on it." Marcus looked at her, his expression serious. "The past is done, Jorah. We are here now and we are happy. That is what matters." She nodded because he was right. The past was full of cold and loneliness and pain, but the present was warm and full and good. She had a husband who loved her, children who filled her days with laughter, and a home that was truly hers. She had everything she had ever wanted, and she had earned it, not through luck or birthright, but through hard work and love and the kindness of one man who had refused to look away when he saw someone suffering. "I love you, Marcus Roth," she said quietly. "I love you too, Jorah Roth," he replied, and in the firelight his eyes were warm and steady and full of the same certainty she felt in her own heart. They stayed there by the fire, the 4 of them, until the children fell asleep and the embers burned low. Then Marcus carried Zara to bed, and Jorah carried Ian, and they tucked them in with gentle hands and whispered good nights. They stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at their children sleeping peacefully in the room they had built for them. And then they went to their own bed, the one they had shared for years, and they held each other close in the darkness. Outside, the night was cold, and the wind blew hard from the mountains. But inside the cottage it was warm, and the fire that had been shared so freely all those years ago burned steady and true, lighting the way for a family that had been forged in kindness and tempered in love. And in the morning, when the sun rose and the new day began, they would wake together and build something new, just as they had every day since that first cold night when a poor man had shared his fire with a lonely orc girl who had nowhere else to turn. That fire had saved her life, but it had given them both so much more. It had given them a future, a family, and a home where warmth was not hoarded but shared, where love was given freely, and where two people who had been told they did not belong had built a place where they belonged completely together. And they lived that life, day by day, year by year, raising their children and building their business and growing old together in the cottage that had once been falling apart, but was now strong and solid and full of life. They faced hardships, as everyone does, lean winters and sick children and customers who refused to pay. But they faced them together, and that made all the difference. When Zara was grown, she took over the workshop, her skill with wood surpassing even her father's, and Ian became a teacher, patient and kind like his mother. They both found partners who loved them, and they brought their own children to visit the cottage, filling it with noise and laughter and the chaos of a growing family. Marcus and Jorah became grandparents, then great-grandparents, and they watched their legacy spread out into the world, a testament to the power of kindness and the strength of love. And through it all, the fire burned warm, just as it had on that first night, a reminder of where they had come from and how far they had come together. The orc girl who had guarded a rich man's gold and slept in the cold had found something worth more than all the gold in the world. The poor man who had shared his fire nightly had gained a family, a home and a love that lasted a lifetime. They had built it all from nothing, from a pot of coals and an act of kindness, and it had been enough. More than enough. It had been everything,